I'd like to begin because it's 7 p.m. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Sister Maria Pascuzzi, the director of Spirit Alive, which is a ministry of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood, New York. So I am welcoming you on behalf of the Sisters of St. Joseph to this course, which begins tonight on the resurrection narratives. I understand today that we have some participants from Korea, as well as our friend, Sister Renata, returning from India, from Australia, Canada, and all over the place, and of course, across the United States. So we're grateful to have everybody. Thank you for joining us and being part of our online community. Before I introduce our presenter tonight, who some of you already met, I have a few announcements. Today, I know that there were frantic emails to Spirit Alive and calls to our tech center in Brentwood, because normally the links go out the evening before, but from now on, just so you know, the links will only come out on the day of the course after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What happened was we would send the links out at night, and then many more people would sign up the next day, and we would have to redo the list. So instead of doing 2 lists, we're just going to have 1 list going out between 4 and 6 p.m. on the day of the course. So don't worry, okay? Each class is being recorded. I repeat this all the time, and some people are not aware, but every class is recorded. It usually takes Matthew about 72 hours to edit and post. You can go and get the recording by going to the Spirit Alive homepage and pressing the recordings button, and then you'll be able to hear this recording as well as all the other recordings. We have a whole library. If you have trouble with your audio, you can press the CC buttons on your screen. If you have an iPad, it's at the top. I think a computer, it's the bottom, and you'll be able to read along. Professor Osiek will leave about 15 minutes at the end of the session to answer your questions. There are about 135 people enrolled in this session, in this course. So discussion will probably be limited, but I invite you to put your questions in the chat box during the presentation or at the end, and Lynn will answer as many as possible. And if you don't like typing, we'll look for your hand and be able to acknowledge you to ask your question. Finally, if you like our programming, please show your appreciation by making an online donation or by sending a check to Spirit Alive at Sisters of St. Joseph, Brentwood, New York, 11717. Now I would like to present Sister Carolyn Osiek, a Sister of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Carolyn has a PhD in New Testament and Christian origins from Harvard University. Lynn was Professor of New Testament at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago for 26 years before joining the faculty of the Brite Divinity School at Texas Christian University. She retired in 2009 to become Provincial Archivist of the Society of the Sacred Heart, the United States, Canada province, and during her very distinguished career, Lynn was president of the Catholic Biblical Association of America and the Society of Biblical Literature. She is the author or editor of over a dozen books and numerous articles on topics of New Testament and early church. So please join me in welcoming her back. Many of you already heard her in the fall, and I know you're looking forward to hearing her again. So thanks, Lynn.
Okay. Thank you, Maria, and good evening, everybody, or good morning, or depending on where you are. Great to have you all here. I see some familiar names and faces. I think there were people who were in my other class in the fall, and of course, some of you that I know. So I am going to share my screen. Yeah. I was missing something there. All right. So Maria asked me to do a second one of these courses, and I said that I wanted to do resurrection narratives, and a little background on that, a personal background. I got interested in this topic when my father died on Good Friday in 1989. And after that, I thought, really, this whole thing about resurrection is just so intriguing. And I don't know what I think, and I don't know what I believe. And so I started working on it, and I've taught a semester-long course on it several times. So I thought that I would share that with you this evening. And I call it resurrection narratives because it's the stories, it's these accounts that are so mystifying, to say nothing of the whole idea, you know. So what we're going to do this evening is, today, whatever it is for you, is to do some background, raising some issues so that we are aware at least of what the issues are, what the puzzles are. And I think it will tease you into your own thinking about what you really believe. So let's start out with the creed. What do we say in the creed? So here's the Apostles' Creed. It's familiar. And notice it right in the middle: suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. Both creeds, the Apostles and the Nicene, say it was buried, and that's important, and we'll get to that. He descended into hell, and hell is a bad word there. You know, he ascended into the underworld where the spirits, as First Peter says, the spirits who were imprisoned. The idea that until he set them free, that everybody who died is in this. It's a Greek idea too, you know, of the underworld. That's it's a shadowy existence. You go on existing, but it isn't any fun, you know. And on the third day, he rose again from the dead. And then he ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of God the Father. And we're going to find out that that right hand of the Father is also very important. And from there, he will come to judge the living and the dead. Then I believe in the Holy Spirit, Holy Catholic Church, communion of saints, forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Every time we say the Apostles' Creed, which we don't too much anymore, we say the Nicene, we say, I believe, or we believe, in the resurrection of the body. The Latin is credo in carnis resurrectionem, the resurrection of the flesh, which is a little even more earthy than the body. So we're saying we believe this. And that's, you see, that's different from the resurrection of Jesus. It's something else. So the Nicene Creed, you're familiar with it. It has all of this Christological language that comes out of the Council of Nicaea. And for our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death, which is an odd expression. I don't know why they don't just say he died. He suffered death and was buried and rose again on the third day. And then the Nicene Creed adds, in accordance with the scriptures. That's out of 1 Corinthians 15. And we're going to spend later on a whole session on 1 Corinthians 15 because it's so important and it has so much in it. He ascended into heaven, is seated at the right hand again. He will come in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. But then we believe in one holy Catholic Apostolic Church, one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. And now, for some strange reason, we don't say we believe. We say we look for, we expect, expecto, expectamus. We look for or await the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. So we're not only saying we believe in it in the Apostles' Creed, we're saying we want it to come. We're happily waiting for this. That's what we're saying. I wonder what we really believe about that. There's a mixed metaphor that you will be very familiar with from funeral liturgies. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. May they rest in peace. And as some clever person has said, how can you rest in peace with eternal light shining on you? If you're going to be resting, the last thing you want is light shining on you all the time. It's a real mixed metaphor. The idea of light, perpetual light, of course, is protection from the darkness. We are afraid of the darkness, and so the perpetual light, the eternal light, is a wonderful image. But the other image is about rest and sleep. There are many images of death in many cultures about sleep, because that's what it kind of looks like when somebody dies. So eternal sleep, but not if you're talking about the resurrection. So what this points up actually is that we don't know what we're talking about. And when I'm teaching the course, one of the assignments, and you might just want to think about doing this yourself. One of the assignments is to attend a funeral, preferably not of someone that was close to you, so that you're emotionally involved. Attend a funeral of somebody you don't know, and just listen. Listen for the language. And you will find it jumps back and forth all the time between eternal rest, light, whatever, and resurrection, which are two different ideas, really. And everybody in the class will come back saying, that's really confusing. They don't know what they're talking about, And that is kind of a conclusion that we have to draw, that in this whole question about immortality and resurrection, we don't know what we're talking about, but we keep trying. So, the death of the guinea pig. This is a story. This really happened many years ago. A friend of mine who had a young son named Ben, was trying to explain Easter to Ben. It was Lent. Easter was coming. And she said, now, Ben, Easter means that life goes on and on. The trouble is, Ben's pet guinea pig had just died. So Ben said, no, life goes on and off. And she said, you're right, Ben. Life goes on and off and on again. Now, this is so symbolic to me of this distinction that we have to make between the idea of immortality. Life goes on and on. Death is a passage, but it's not the end. Resurrection, life goes off. It's a real death. And that's why I think the creeds say he died and he was buried. It's a real death. There's no question about it, you see. And that the distinction between the two is really hard, and we keep jumping back and forth all the time. But resurrection really means it's a real death, and life is restored in a new way, not the same way. But it's off and it's on again. So I put Socrates here. If you remember, Socrates ran into such political trouble that he was really put in a situation where he had to drink the hemlock and die. And the whole discourse that he entertains with his friends is, I'm going, it'll be okay, and I'm going to continue, and I believe that there's life beyond death, but it's immortality. It's not a real death. It's a continuation. A stereotype of this, of the Greek approach, is that who needs a body? Once you're freed from the constraints of the body, you have greater freedom. Well, this is immortality, right? With resurrection, that body is still somehow there, transformed, but still there. Now, I want to look at a passage in the Wisdom of Solomon in chapters 2 and 3. And part of this is used in the funeral, one of the funeral liturgies. It's one of the optional readings. So it may be familiar to you. Wisdom of Solomon is late in biblical history. It is not in the Protestant canon. It's not in the Hebrew canon. We think the original is actually written in Greek, not in Hebrew or Aramaic. So it's Israelites in the time just before the turn of the era, and they're Greek-speaking Jews, perhaps in Alexandria, in some Greek-speaking place, and they too are wrestling with this whole question, but they're very there's not much here about resurrection. This is really immortality. So in chapter 2, we have people who say, come, let us lie in wait for the righteous man, because he's inconvenient to us. He opposes our actions. He reproaches us for sins against the law and accuses us of sin. He professes to have knowledge of God and calls himself a child or a servant of the Lord. He became to us a reproof of our thoughts. The very sight of him is a burden to us, because his manner of life is unlike that of others, and his ways are strange. So we considered him somebody to avoid. And he calls the last end of the righteous a happy one. He boasts that God is his Father. Let us see if his words are true. Let us test what will happen at the end of his life. For if the righteous one is God's child, God will help him and will deliver him from the hand of his adversaries. You will hear an echo here in the Passion narrative of Matthew, where people say, oh, he says he's God's son. Let's see if God helps him, if God gets him down from the cross. It's an allusion to this passage. So let us test him with insult and torture and find out how gentle he is and make a trial of his. Let's test his forbearance. Let's condemn him to a shameful death. For according to what he says, he will be protected. That's the way they reasoned, and they didn't know the secret purposes of God. For God created us for incorruption, aphtharsia, incorruption, which is immortality, and made us in the image of his own eternity. But through the devil's envy, death entered the world. So the devil is responsible for death entering the world. It was not meant to be so. People were meant to be immortal, not dying. Now here's the part that you may recognize at the beginning of chapter 3. But the souls of the righteous are in the hand of God, and no torment will touch them. In the eyes of the foolish, they seem to have died, and their departure was thought to be a disaster. But they're going from us and their going from us is thought to be their destruction, but they are in peace. For though in the sight of others they were punished, their hope is full of immortality. Having suffered a little, they will receive great reward, because God tested them and found them worthy. Like gold in the furnace, God tried them. Like a sacrificial burnt offering, God accepted them. And they will shine forth like sparks in stubble, and they will govern nations and rule peoples, and the Lord will reign with them forever. So it's the perennial question, why do the innocent suffer? Why do the just suffer and the evil seem to get along fine? And the answer is the roles get reversed in death. So there's a strong belief here in existence beyond death. And in fact, for the just, it's a very good existence. They will triumph. Okay. So that is the strains of the idea of immortality. But there's something else going on here, more than immortality. Daniel 12, this passage is often pointed to. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth, shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. The wise shall shine, not shine, like the stars forever. So those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. Now we're talking about death, people who are buried. And they will wake up and rise to everlasting life. Now this is Daniel. This is nothing Christian, nothing about Jesus. And Daniel again is a late work, sometime around maybe 160 or so BC. And it has introduced this other idea, which really comes out of apocalyptic literature, where the book of Revelation is prime example of that, where things are going to get reversed in some kind of cataclysmic change. And when that happens, the just are going to get rewarded. Now, the wonderful piece about that is in 2 Maccabees 7. 2 Maccabees 7, the 2 Maccabees, first of all, is also fairly late. The narrative situation here is the Hellenistic ruler Antiochus Epiphanes, who is trying to break Israelite solidarity, identity. And he's trying to get people to eat pork, which would be the denial of their identity, of who they are, see, and that's the issue. So here we have the mother and her 7 sons. And the tyrant ruler starts with the oldest son, and tries to get each one of them separately to deny who they are, to eat pork. And when they refuse, there are all kinds of lovely descriptions of the torture. But there are 4 verses here that are very interesting. So the first brother has died, and they try to get the second one. And it says that when he was at his last breath, he says, "You accursed wretch, you dismiss us from the present life, but the King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life." So we are going to be raised up in triumph. After the next one says, his hands are cut off. And he says, "I got these from heaven, and because of his laws, I disdain them. And from him, I hope to get them back again." So bodily restoration. Then, of course, he's killed. Then the next one, when he was near death, he said, "One cannot but choose to die at the hands of mortals and to cherish the hope God gives of being raised again by him. But for you, the torturers, there will be no resurrection to life." So it's only for martyrs, it seems, at this point. Those who get their bodies mangled and die for what they believe in are going to have this somehow restoration, bodily restoration. And finally, the mother, after all the sons are killed, well, except for the last one, the youngest one. And so the mother says to him, "The creator of the world, who shaped the beginning of humankind and devised the origin of all things, will in his mercy give life and breath back to you again, since you now forget yourself for the sake of his loss. So this is not just their hope is full of immortality. This is something quite different, and it's it goes with the firm belief that we are embodied beings, that we can't really get along without the body, that stereotype of Greek belief, and it is a stereotype, yeah, you're freed from the body and then you're better off, that's not really what's being talked about here. And some want to contrast the Jewish and the Greek perspectives on this. And of course, the Jewish perspective would be much more embodied, that you can't really be a person without a body. But again, we're always dealing with stereotypes here, and there are differences. But let's think about John, Gospel of John, chapter 11. This is the story of the raising of Lazarus. And remember that Jesus arrives late. He's been in the tomb 4 days. And this, the fact that in the Creed, and Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 that Jesus was raised on the third day, also gives rise to an interpretation that there was a belief that the spirit stayed around for 3 days and then left. This raising of Lazarus on the fourth day, it's probably deliberately on the fourth day because of that. He's really dead, the spirit isn't there anymore. But it did give rise to understandings of Jesus being raised on the third day, that his spirit was still there and could therefore easily go back into the body. So there are all kinds of ways of understanding that. But here, remember, Mary stays at home and Martha goes out to meet Jesus, and she reproaches him. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But still, I know anything you do, it will be okay. And he says, your brother will rise. She says, yeah, I know he'll rise on the last day, but that's not much help to me now, And then you go into that conversation about, I am the resurrection, and we'll deal with that in much more detail another time. But again, it is the idea of not his spirit is still there and he's not really dead. And whereas you have that in some of the gospel raising to life, she's the little girl is not dead, she's sleeping, and more that could be explained as sort of being revived, but not here. So it's a dramatic difference. Paul, in Romans 6, uses the metaphor of death and resurrection, really, in a way that's more imaginative and closer to the kinds of ways that I think we tend to use resurrection language, of understanding that some new transformation, conversion, whatever it is resurrection, which is in fact what the Corinthians seem to have been saying, and Paul disagrees with that kind of a use, but we'll get to that. So in Romans 6, don't you know that we who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Remember that baptism is adult baptism, and it's modeled on the mikvah, the purification ritual, Jewish purification ritual, in which you go down completely under the water. So probably they did baptism that way as well. So going into the water and then coming back up again is a very dramatic illustration. We were indeed buried with him through baptism into death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead for the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. So Jesus really died. Jesus really was raised. And almost always, the language is not active, it's passive, was raised. God raised him. He was raised from the dead. So we might live in newness of life. So real death, real resurrection for Christ, symbolic death for us, and symbolic new life, the new life of baptism. For if we have been united with him through a death like his, we will also be united with him in resurrection. We will be future. Hasn't happened for us yet. Has for him, not for us. We know our old self was crucified with him. Our sinful body might be done away with. Dead person is evolved from, so dead to sin is the idea here. So then, if we have died with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him. Christ, raised from the dead, no longer dies. Death no longer has power over him. As to his death, he died to sin. As to life, he lives for God. And so you must think of yourselves as dead to sin and living for God in Christ Jesus. So it's symbolic death for us, symbolic new life. And here, what that means is no more sin. But Colossians, which is most likely written by somebody else in the Pauline tradition, not by Paul. If then you were raised with Christ, seek what is above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. So now we have been raised with Christ. It doesn't say we've died and we will be raised with Christ the way Paul does in Romans 6. But it is a different approach, a different way of understanding the language and a different way of understanding the whole reality. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees did apparently believe in a bodily resurrection. They were influenced by this, the apocryphal literature of apocalyptic theology. And as I said, we think it's apocalyptic theology that brought in the whole idea of resurrection of the body. First, just for the martyrs, for the other just people, and then eventually for everybody. But the trouble is the wicked aren't going to like it. You know, it's going to be bad news for them. Sadducees apparently did not believe in, they didn't get into this apocalyptic theology, therefore didn't believe in bodily resurrection or angels or spirits. Apparently that may be a stereotype. We don't really have any direct access to Sadducee beliefs. That's the trouble. We do to Pharisee beliefs. Paul was a Pharisee, but we don't to the Sadducees. And Luke in Acts didn't like them very much. So they come off being stereotyped and mocked, really. In Acts 4, which is very early in Acts, they're still in Jerusalem, and Peter and John are going about healing people, and of course they're preaching, and they got arrested because the Sadducees complain that they're preaching resurrection of the dead through Jesus. They are preaching that, of course, Jesus has been raised, and therefore that fits right into the context of a general resurrection. So you see, we approach this from the standpoint of Jesus' resurrection. You have to stand back and realize that in this context of the generation of Jesus and soon after, they have a context to fit it into. If you believe in this developing idea of the restoration of bodily existence, somehow, it's not continuing the same life, but some kind of a restoration of bodily existence, then you have a context for understanding the resurrection of Christ. It's just that it hasn't happened for anybody else yet, but it has for him. So it's a different approach. We tend to approach it from the other side, you know. And in Acts 23, this is now when Paul has done all of his journeying, all of his adventures, and he is now back in Jerusalem. And he has been warned for a couple of chapters in Acts that when he goes back to Jerusalem, and the idea is that he's, at least in 2 Corinthians, not so much in Acts, the idea is he's going back to deliver this collection of money that he has collected for the relief of the poor. And Jerusalem seems to be the Jerusalem community seems to be the base for distribution. So he's bringing this money back. And therefore he needs to go to Jerusalem, and he's being warned that dire things are going to happen when he gets there. I must go to Jerusalem, you know. And interestingly, this, of course, is also in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus is like that. Jesus sets his face to go to Jerusalem and encounters opposition as he goes. And of course, when he gets there, you know what happens. And that is kind of mirrored in Paul in the story in Acts, that he goes to Jerusalem and there finds his destiny, though, of course, then he's sent to Rome, but he gets arrested. So Paul is arrested in Acts 23, and he's on trial. And he looks around, and it's the Sanhedrin, and he's got Pharisees on one side and Sadducees on the other side. And he says, I'm on trial because of the resurrection of the dead, which starts a fight between the Pharisees and the Sadducees who are there. This is an amusing scene. There are so many wonderful stories, jokes, I think, in Acts, and this is one of them. And we take everything very solemnly, but it really is intended to be something to laugh at. That Paul manipulates the whole group into going at each other and kind of forgetting about him. And there's a soldier there who's supposed to be guarding him. And when they start fighting each other, the soldier yanks Paul out of there and puts him in safekeeping. So the issue again there is the resurrection of the dead as a contentious issue among them. In Acts 17, of course, you have Paul's speech at the Areopagus in Athens. And this is it's a very stylized narrative. At one point, it says that the people there in the Agora in Athens spend all their time looking for something new, which is a jab, you know, that they're not serious, but they think they are. And of course, it's the heart of philosophy. And so everybody's trying to philosophize. And so in Acts 17, Paul delivers this speech at the Areopagus, which is the place where people came to give their speeches, you know. And this is what it looks like today. It's this big hunk of rock, and you see that the camera angle there is down. It's from the Acropolis. It's just right next to the Acropolis. And Paul, the Acts says that Paul sees an altar to an unknown God. And we kind of generalize that into the unknown God. It's really to an unknown God. But Paul then uses that as the basis of his speech. And he says, the God that you don't know, I know. And so he starts talking about the one true God and Jesus and all this wonderful thing. And they're all entranced until he says, and God vindicated him, Christ, in his death, Jesus, by raising him from the dead. And at that point, everybody gives up on him, because this, of course, is Greek territory. This is philosophical territory, and the Greeks don't want to have anything to do with this. And so at that point, they just sort of give up on him and walk away. and again, it's kind of, sort of, it's stereotyping, but it would entertain an audience. The way you get up to the Areopagus today is up these steps, which is not a whole lot of fun, I'll tell you. And on the side is this plaque that engraves in modern Greek Paul's speech of the Areopagus. Resurrection and ascension. See, we also need to look at this. Luke spreads it out. 40 days. He's raised from the dead. He appears to them in various ways for 40 days. 40 days, of course, is biblical, symbolic, 40 days in the desert, 40 years wandering in the desert at 40. So it's a deliberately chosen amount of time. But remember that in John 20, when Mary Magdalene thinks he's the gardener and then realizes that it is really Jesus and tries to hold on to him. And he says, don't hang on to me. I haven't yet ascended to my Father. So go tell my brothers, I am ascending to God, to your God and my God. It's like a process that is started and it's on the way and it's going to be pretty quick, Ascension is really an aspect of resurrection. It's the same, it's not the same thing exactly. It's slightly different in its understanding, but it is a necessary piece that goes with the belief in bodily resurrection, because it's the transformation of this bodily existence and bringing it into the realm of God. So ascension is a familiar motif, and Enoch is one of them. Genesis 5:24. Enoch walked with God and was no more because God took him. So that's all, and that's the end. That's the end of Enoch, So some kind of an ascension there. And then Elijah in 2 Kings. This is a carving of the ascension of Elijah that on the doors of Santa Sabina in Rome. At the bottom, you have Elisha. If you remember the story, they offer a sacrifice. They're walking together, and Elisha knows somehow that Elijah is about to take off and asks for a portion of his spirit, which Elijah gives him, lays his cloak over Elisha. And then this fiery chariot comes between the two of them and takes Elijah up. And there's one of the horses of the chariot. You can see the wheel, and up here is this winged figure that is pulling him up. So Elijah is another example of an ascension. And so they understand that, of being taken up to what, of course. Then that raises the whole question of what is heaven and where, where is God? And if you're talking about bodily existence, up, so there are a lot of things here that don't fit together. But the idea of an ascension is already there. And in the Roman world, it's a Greek word, apotheosis, the divinization, translation from human to divinized, okay? And the apotheosis of Augustus, this is a famous cameo. It's a big thing. It's like 7 by 9 inches. It's in Vienna, and it is the raising, the divinization of Augustus, who's in heroic nudity in the middle, and he's being crowned, and he's talking with the goddess Roma. That's the woman who's looking at him. So this is one of many examples of this whole idea of apotheosis. The Emperor Vespasian is reported to have said on his deathbed as his last words, "I think I'm becoming a god." So the idea of the emperor being divinized is quite common. This is Sabina, the wife of Hadrian, and this is a huge plaque. It's as tall as a room, and the funeral pyre. She's being cremated, And her spirit, whatever it is borne upward by a winged figure, a female winged figure in this case, because to match her. And her husband, Hadrian, watches it go. And the gesture he has with the finger of this is not giving somebody a finger. This is a gesture of mourning that is often used in the portraits. And Constantine. Constantine's coronation coin shows him in a quadriga, a chariot pulled by 4 horses, and you see the hand from heaven reaching down as his hand reaches up. So the whole idea still of divinization of the emperor. And the apotheosis of George Washington. This is in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, straight up. It's there now, and it is Washington at the bottom there, in a suitably clad in a long robe and surrounded by heavenly figures. And they actually do use the word apotheosis of it, and it was done in 1865, and there you have it. So the whole idea of ascension is also common, and you can throw in here the Assumption of Mary too, which is part of this whole tradition. And so an ascension of Jesus again fits a context, and we come at it from without that context. We come at it thinking, well, that's really odd, because up. Do we really think heaven is up? And to us, the whole thing is kind of unique. It's not unique at all. It is really part of a whole context of the understanding of great people being carried upward by some divine manifestation. So Acts 1:9-12, he was taken up and disappeared from their midst. And it was not, we use the words ascension and assumption in an interesting way. Ascension of Jesus and assumption of Mary, as if she were taken up and he wasn't. But the language really is that he was taken up. And the joining of Mary there is simply say it fits the context, that she's great too. In Ephesians, however, in chapter 4, he ascended on high and gave gifts to people. This is a quotation from a psalm. And he ascended far above the heavens. So Acts is not the only passage in the New Testament that has that understanding of ascending. Now, there's one other thing in here, one other piece of this, and that's the idea of exaltation. So resurrection, we should start with immortality. Immortality, resurrection, ascension, and exaltation. And there's plenty of that in the New Testament, especially. Key here is Psalm 110:1. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet, or make your enemies your footstool, different translations. Now, the idea of sitting at the right hand of the ruler, this comes right out of ancient government systems, throne room scenes. The person sitting at the right hand of the central figure is next in charge, next in power. And so you have allusions to it, a lot of them. In Acts 2, in the preaching, God raised him to the right hand. It's part of the whole context of the preaching. Philippians 2, that's supposed to be 5-11, sorry. That's the famous Philippian hymn, have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who didn't consider it something to be grasped at, but took the form of a slave and emptied himself and even unto death, the death of a slave. Therefore, God exalted him and gave him the name above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth. So you really have a reversal there because of his humiliation and shameful death. Therefore, God exalted him. And that hymn doesn't use resurrection language. It uses exaltation language. It's all about the same idea that this human person, Jesus, became the glorified risen one, now at the right hand of God, now with all cosmic power. And so we get the cosmic Christ. And there are other passages. Colossians 1 has a great thing there where he's the one who holds the universe together, you know, the whole cosmic role. Ephesians 1, God raised him and set him at God's right hand in the heavens. The death of Stephen in Acts 7, if you remember, he is contending with some opponents that are not very friendly to him. And he has this interminable speech that goes on about 50 verses and rehearses the whole of salvation history and the whole message about Jesus. And eventually he is being stoned to death. And his last words are that he sees, no, not second to last words, because his last words is forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. It mirrors Jesus. But before that, he says, I see the heavens open and Jesus sitting at the right hand of God. So it's another one of these allusions to exaltation of Christ. So we have immortality, I should have put it first, and resurrection and ascension and exaltation. And they're all different ideas, and yet they're all part of the same reality, the same mystery. And that is the overcoming of death by Jesus and the promise, therefore, of the same thing happening to us. So to understand the resurrection of Jesus within this context, I think is helpful, of the whole belief that this really is possible, and that those who are loyal to God are promised this kind of a reward, whether it's going to be immortality, that's wisdom of Solomon, or it's going to be a real death, perhaps a brutal death, you know, with the Maccabees, and life being given back again, some kind of bodily existence, but in a totally new way. And the resurrection narratives in the Gospels about Jesus do just that. It's him. They usually know it is he, not always. And he's changed, and yet he's the same. So it's an intriguing thing. So by way of conclusion, there's general confusion about resurrection and immortality, though they're distinct, but we mix them up all the time. There's general confusion about how we understand the whole thing, and the Bible writers didn't have it clear either. Because we're talking about something we've never experienced, except those who claim that they saw Jesus alive after his death. Probably the only one who then writes about it is Paul. And what holds the whole thing together is the insistence from every corner of Christianity, really, except maybe the fringes, the insistence from the beginning that Christ has overcome the finality of death and makes a path for us. So that is the story. Confusing, huh? So we await your responses or questions.
Use the chat box or just raise your hand.
We have somebody with a hand up here, Emerita. You'll have to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your the pace of your presentation and bringing us along at a pace where we could begin to follow you this mystery. What I wanted to ask you to clarify is, did I understand that you said when Jesus appeared to Mary that there was this phrase indicating that he had begun his ascension?
Yeah.
And so could you talk a little bit about, I'm a little confused about just how you understand that the ascension and resurrection of Jesus, in that whatever glimpses we have of a direction or however you can comment on that, just maybe another time. Right now, say it again is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, okay, so theologically, the resurrection and ascension are the same. Okay, it's the restoration of life now in this changed way that is totally in touch with God, with the divine. Okay, and so what Luke does is he realizes it's the same thing, but he spreads it out in time, in a narrative way, you see. And John doesn't do that. For John, it's he's kind of on the way at this right away, Easter morning. You know, resurrection and ascension are outside of time. But in order to talk about them, we have to put them in some kind of a narrative time. So that's part of our problem, you see. In Matthew's gospel, what happens? Jesus leads them up to a high mountain at the end of the gospel and says, "Go preach the gospel to everybody." And he says, "I am with you all the time until the end of the age." Well, what does that mean? You know, it doesn't say anything about him taking off for heaven. There isn't really an ascension there. Resurrection is all he needs, and that's perpetual presence. I don't know if that helps anything. Okay. People are left speechless.
So, Carolyn, can I ask a question? So you just said that ascension is perpetual presence.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Well, resurrection is perpetual presence, and yeah. See, the trouble with ascension too is that it's absence. I mean, it's I'm going away, all the things in the Last Supper discourse, which is supposed to be talking about Jesus' death. But I always get sad on Ascension Day because we've had these 40 days of presence, of appearances, and now bye-bye, and going. But it's sorry. Do you want to say more, because that's kind of where I'm left?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering what you meant resurrection. You said ascension because I was wondering.
Oh, okay.
Because
Yeah.
that's okay.
Resurrection is perpetual presence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think you have somebody wrote something in the Q&A box.
Okay.
Can you see that, Carolyn?
Hold on. Yes. Would I be in the right ballpark to think great people in those times were seen as having immortality? Yeah. Did Jesus via Paul say we slobs on the bus have some kind of immortality as well? Yeah, it's popularizing, it's democratizing immortality. That's well said. Not just Augustus and George Washington, even women gain immortality like Mary. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're right. Definitely in the right ballpark. But remember that with Maccabees and the apocryphal, I keep saying apocryphal when I mean apocalyptic. The apocalyptic literature is also popularizing, democratizing it, and saying, if you're faithful to God, and especially if you're a martyr, but the possibility that everybody who's faithful to God, at least, will have that reward.
Mm.
It forces us to think, doesn't it? To raise the question of what really do I think about this? When I say the Nicene Creed every Sunday, and I say I'm looking forward to the resurrection of the dead. Ooh, am I really? It's kind of scary stuff, and certainly mysterious stuff.
Carolyn, could I ask you a question? What do you think was the impetus for the beginning of talking about resurrection? So you notice that these were all late books in Scripture. Like, what happened in that period, between 200 and the coming of Christ, that people began to have the idea of resurrection that they did not have in the 500, 800, 1,000 years before that. Like, I'm just wondering if terrible persecution becomes an impetus, that is, it gives rise in human beings to the idea that this cannot be only what there is, because it's too miserable. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that. I'm thinking about the people in Gaza and all the people suffering around the world today, and wondering like what they're thinking tonight, about the misery of their lives, and if that doesn't give a spark within the human psyche to have to imagine something beyond what is. Because as you said, we all go from Christ's resurrection forward, but there was no Christ resurrection when these people started thinking about resurrection. So how, without resurrection, did they think about resurrection? I guess just pondering that question. You probably don't have an answer, but I think it's something.
Yeah, as far as we know, earlier on, there certainly is, there is a gradually growing idea about some kind of continuing existence after death. And of course, you have that in Greek religion as well, Hades, but it's shadowy and it's uncertain, and I think they were inspired to that. Then there's part of that gets into like a place of punishment for the wicked, and that's what wisdom is. Wisdom of Solomon is struggling with. The whole Bible struggles with that. Human history, we struggle with that. Why do the wicked prosper Why do the innocent suffer? You know,
Mhm.
and nobody has a real answer to that. You know, remember Job asked that question, and God says, "Well, were you there when I created the world? No. Then shut your mouth. Don't ask any questions." You know, and I think resurrection is very much bound up with that question. It's one of the answers that you know that it's beyond our experience, but it's going to it will happen, you know. And so I think it's it's one of the responses to that perennial question. The psalmist, you know, has this ingenious manipulative approach to God, please save my life, don't let me die, because if I die, I'm going to be going to Sheol, and people there can't praise you because we're not connected with you. We can't praise you. So if you let me live, then I can praise you. So it's to your advantage to keep me alive, you know. That shadowy existence, you know, begins to give place to this idea of restoration to wholeness. And I you know, there was terrible persecution with the Antiochus Epiphanes around that time, but certainly you can't say that it's more terrible than anything that ever happened before that to the Israelites, you know. So, you know, it's just one of those developments that happens of and it's born from hope. You know, almost every religious system has some understanding of something continuing beyond death, or if it's reincarnation, or you know, if it's paradise, or in paradise, you know, the name means a Persian garden, and so when you talk about paradise, you're talking about a luscious garden, and whatever it is, there's some expression, and I think it's expression of hope. And this is one of them, and it's the one that was the context for their experience of Jesus overcoming death somehow.
Interesting. Thank you. I think, Steve, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Carol, can you look at the non-canonical literature, like, for instance, the Gospel of Thomas?
Mhm.
What does that say about resurrection or other particular non-canonical?
I'd have to look at it, but I don't think the Gospel of Thomas has anything to say about resurrection. It moves in the direction of Gnosticism, and in Gnosticism, you're really more into immortality there than resurrection. The continuity of the spirit. Very interesting is the Gospel of Peter and Gospel of Peter, which we are going to look at a little bit later, which does have a scene in the garden at the empty tomb that is quite distinctive. So it's not that the non-canonicals don't deal with it, but Gospel of Thomas, no, I wouldn't say it does. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Does somebody else have a hand up? Can't see on my screen.
Well, there's something else here. Mm-hmm. Oh,
Can
no.
I ask a question?
Anne? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Sister Carolyn. I'm mindful of the fact that even the discussion of the word resurrection,
Mm-hmm.
the word resurrection amongst young people, right?
Mm.
Bizarre, can be, depending on the universities or colleges that you're teaching in, right? It's just an outlandish concept for some people
Mm-hmm.
today, right? Mindful of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm just wondering, I've always been curious and I don't know, and maybe you have some insight into this. When Paul spoke about this experience in 2 Corinthians, where he was caught up in an out of body,
Mm-hmm.
You recall that it's in 2 Corinthians 12. I don't know if I was in the body or out of the body. And I've heard various interpretations of it, and yet, who knows? It almost sounds like some sort of a near death or experience. What was that? Is there any insight into what happened to him?
I think that was a mystical experience.
Okay.
It's not connected with the resurrection of Christ necessarily. I just think it was a mystical experience, like some people have, that they experience being taken out of themselves. Remember Teresa of Avila with the fiery dart, into her breast. Meister Eckhart will also speak of experiences like that. So that's what I think that was. And he says he was caught up to the third heaven, which is not terribly high, because probably he's dealing with a system of 7 heavens. God is in the 7th heaven. So to be caught up to the 3rd heaven, well, that's on the way, it's not all the way up. But it means the experience of being taken away from earth, from time, and
And wasn't Teresa of Avila pronounced dead for a period of time? A short
that
time,
was early.
Julian of Norwich.
Yeah, I'm no expert on either one of them, but Teresa of Avila, it was when she was quite young that she was paralyzed for something like 10 days. And I think they did think that she was dead at one point, and then she recovered from it. Very odd.
They did last rites on her, yeah.
Yeah, and Julian had a mystical experience when she was on the point of death, and she had this experience out of which all of her writings later came.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing I think Paul has there, which is not connected with resurrection necessarily.
No, but a glimpse into perhaps something on the other side.
Exactly.
Gives us confidence in the concept of resurrection, right? So to me, it adds to the argument for resurrection.
Have any other questions?
Emerita has one again. Emerita?
Yes, I wanted to go back to where you began with a personal experience and just ask, in our experience, many of us know people who are very good who die. And I'm just, I'll just express, I pray for them on their journey, because I think they're not in a static state. I guess I'm asking for your critique. I also ask them to pray for us if we've been working on a project together. And I imagine the love of God embracing them. So those are 3 things that I would say characterize my my grief. I mean, some aspect, my connection with that person. And I just wondered, without your asking you about something personal, what do you think? How do you advise people? Or do you think that my approach is appropriate, or it's kind of a both and? And I know we're talking about mystery. We don't know.
Well, I think grief and mourning has its own dynamic that you have to let happen. Out of it, hopefully, comes hope, a belief that it's not the end, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So we will be
Yes.
thinking
Well,
about
it's-
this for another 4 weeks.
Yeah, it's now 8:16. Lynn, thanks so much. I don't think anybody thought they were going to go to bed tonight with all the questions that you've raised in their head, but they're certainly interesting questions. And, and yes, I think resurrection is born of hope, that there is something beyond this. So with that in mind, and especially we try to remember as we conclude every week for the poor people who are dying of hunger and starvation in these crazy wars, both in Israel and the Ukraine. We ask God to give wisdom to the people who are leading these governments, that they begin to act for the good of their people, for peace and for reconciliation instead of retribution and violence, and especially for the mother of Mr. Navalny, that she have her son's body returned to her so he can not only be dead, but buried and hopefully share in the resurrection. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Good night, everybody. See you
Good
next
night.
week. And I see a number of you are returnees. Thank you for coming back. And some of you are new. Thank you for joining us for the first time. Hope to see you again. Thank you. Thanks, Carolyn.
Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.